Hey, everybody. Good afternoon, evening. I never know about this weird time of day. I'm thrilled that y'all are here with us today on Facebook Live. We are very excited to be bringing this group of folks together again for a second conversation about everyone's favorite topic, brownfields in the 30th Street corridor. So we can go to the next slide and we're going to do some quick introductions and we're going to dive into the meat. Welcome. We are all very glad that you're here. We can go to the next slide. So we are going to do some quick introductions of the folks that you see smiling at you on this slide here. And then we are going to give a couple of extra minutes to let our special guests introduce themselves. So for the RPOP team, present today with you is me, Teresa Zawacki. I'm interim co-executive director. I focus on our place-based strategies. Cassandra Webb could not be with us today, but we send her love and good tidings wherever she is. She is also interim co-executive director. Colby, Vashti, Eliza, do you all want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Kobe Bentley, the Assistant Director of Place with Russell Place of Promise, and my work also focuses on place-based investments.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vashti Proctor, and I'm a Community Engagement Specialist for Russell Place of Promise. It's good to be here with you all this evening.
Thanks, Vashti.
And I'm Eliza Wilson. I'm an outreach ambassador with RPOP, going out in the community and informing people what we've got going on here at RPOP, and really excited to be here with you all and learn alongside everyone.
Thanks, Eliza. We're happy that you're with us tonight. Tyler and Sarah, we are going to give you guys a little more time to introduce yourselves later in the presentation, but do y'all want to unmute really quickly and say hello to the audience?
Sure. I'm Tyler McDaniel. I work with Blueprint Kentucky. We're a unit at the University of Kentucky. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ellis. I'm the Brownfields project manager with Louisville Metro Government. I work in the Office of Planning, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Sarah. We're happy you're here too. So now that we've all done introductions, I think we can go to the next slide, and we are going to get into the heart of what we're here to talk about today. And I'm going to kick it over to Colby.
Okay. All right, so today our session objectives are going to be learning about other communities participating in brownfields planning. We're also going to be discussing the history of the 30th Street corridor and how the history contributes to today's brownfields. And we're also going to discuss some recent developments in the corridor as well. We can go to the next slide. So I want to reintroduce the 30th Street corridor planning effort and kind of ground us in the area that we are discussing tonight. So for this project, the corridor runs from West Market Street on the north to Kentucky Street on the south. It also runs from South 28th Street on the east to Lewis Coleman Drive on the west. And this corridor touches Russell, Parkland, Shawnee, and Chickasaw. It also sits in the middle of more than $500 million in new and also planned investments. That investment matters. But tonight we're going to be asking deeper questions. How do we understand the history of this corridor? How has the past industrial activity shaped the land as we see today? And how do residents help shape what comes next? Brownfields are properties where past uses or possible contaminations make redevelopment more complicated. And this meeting is going to give us space to better understand the history and to make sure that community voices remain part of the planning process. Now, I want to connect this work to the broader brownfields planning efforts that are happening in Kentucky. Next slide, please. So the 30th Street corridor is one of three focus areas connected to the Kentucky Energy and Environmental Cabinet's EPA assessment grant. The other two communities are Maysville in northern Kentucky and Scottsville in southern Kentucky. Each community has its own history, land use patterns, and redevelopment needs, but the shared goal is the same: The goal is to create community-informed plans for brownfield redevelopment in each area. For Russell and the 30th Street Corridor, this work is more than just technical assessments. It's about understanding the history of the land, understanding the environmental impacts, and also making sure that residents have a voice in the future redevelopment conversations. Now, to help me explain this work further, we have a few partners joining us tonight. So at this point, I want to introduce a few partners that are helping us support this work. Tonight, we are joined by Tyler McDaniel with the Blueprint Kentucky, and also Sarah Ellis with Louisville Metro Government. And we also want to acknowledge the Kentucky Energy and Environmental Cabinet for helping lead this effort through the EPA assessment grant. And I'm going to be asking a few questions to kind of help frame tonight's discussion. And I am going to start off with Tyler. So Tyler, can you please help us explain why the cabinet wanted to pursue brownfields planning as a part of the EPA assessment grant that they received?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the intro, Colby. So I work, as I mentioned, in Kentucky in partnership with Kirsten O'Leary and the rest of the Kentucky Brownfields team, the Energy and Environment Cabinet. And we've had a long-standing partnership in this work. And this EPA assessment grant is really, I think, a good opportunity to kind of combine that partnership in new ways. In that the assessment grant that we're really going after the main goal of that grant, which is to assess potentially contaminated properties. But within that, trying to use community engagement and community planning tools to kind of move beyond just simply identifying those contamination issues. And instead, we're trying to figure out what community members want out of these sites whenever they're cleaned up. So really trying to involve community from the very start, even helping identifying sites, helping them understand the process. And the engagement grant itself was or is a really great opportunity to do really deep targeted work in these areas, but also, having extra funding to do more statewide work while we're doing hopefully really meaty work in these areas, still being able to do those community engaged components elsewhere as well. But trying to do something new and a little different, I guess.
I agree. We like innovation, and so we definitely appreciate that. Could you speak more to what is Blueprint Kentucky, and how are you supporting the cabinet's work, and are there any other communities that you're working in right now?
Yeah, totally. So Blueprint Kentucky, as I mentioned, we're a unit at the University of Kentucky, and we are, broadly speaking, a community engagement, community planning organization. We sort of operate from this idea that engaged communities can lead to vibrant economies and flourishing places. So we have multiple program areas. A lot of the work that I do kind of revolves around sort of like downtown redevelopment in more rural areas and kind of downtown planning in smaller towns, but also sort of neighborhood specific planning. And we also do a lot of work based around community health needs assessments, facilitating those throughout the state. We do feasibility studies. We have a thing called First Impressions, where we'll sort of come in and talk about like signage and infrastructure and wayfinding and sidewalks, that kind of stuff. We do a whole host of things, and arts and design work, community design, all kinds of stuff. We have a lot of program areas and a very robust website. Check it out. But for the last few years, we've had this partnership with the Energy and Environment Cabinet that is based around brownfields. But we sort of we're working in brownfields, but I always like to say we're kind of trying to like Trojan horse in like community redevelopment, like within brownfields, and really like giving communities ownership over these spaces before we get to that, like the larger development part, right? So we're trying to put up some guardrails and do some planning before it gets to that. And that partnership arose from my predecessor, Shane Barton, had done a lot of work as part of a Promise Zone grant in Southeast Kentucky that involved some of this. And then that partnership grew from there. And over the last few years has sort of ping-ponged around the state to different communities. We did a really big plan in Hawesville, Kentucky. And while they unfortunately did not get their Brownfield grant, they did walk away with a pretty robust strategic plan for their community. They were able to kind of like settle up some different kind of like debts and things like that. Somehow, I don't understand how that part works. But from that process, they were able to have this and sort of move forward. We've been doing a lot of work in Northeast Kentucky. We created a really robust, like 80+ building inventory with them last fall. So hopefully they get that grant. We'll hopefully hear soon, fingers crossed. And as Colby mentioned, we're in Scottsville and Maysville right now as well.
I gotcha. It sounds like you guys are doing some great work around the state. In regards to the focus areas, what are the cabinet's goals for those 3 focus areas that you guys are currently working in?
So the 3 areas that we're working in are vastly different. And they're also all in different phases of this work. I feel like, us offering support to RPOP, that y'all have such a great presence already and that you have so many robust plans built out that in some ways, I feel like I'm learning from y'all like every time we get together. And I really appreciate the opportunity to support you in this work. In Maysville, they have their inventories a little, like, I would say more well mapped, and their target area sort of encompasses the downtown, which is like the east end of Maysville is largely residential, but there's a lot of old industry there. And then you have the west end of Maysville, which is sort of like the downtown. And there's some residential over there as well, but it sort of exists in a valley. So we're kind of working in like the old part of the city in the valley before you get out onto the hill. And that creates a lot of really interesting opportunities with the industrial history in that area, with some of the downtown commercial history in that area. And they also have some really great amenities that I'm hoping we can capitalize on. Like they have a small town bus system, and I really want to do like a Brownfields bus tour where we're doing some kind of like walking audits in some of our cluster areas. Scottsville is different in that they have the downtown core, but theirs is also more in sort of Allen County as a whole. And they have some really interesting pieces. We haven't done like our launch event there. That's coming up in June, but they were also planning after that launch event and building out their inventory more. We're hoping to work with a group of their high school students on their capstone project to sort of do a bit of like environmental testing and familiarizing them with the Brownfields process because they have an environmental track in their high school, while also doing some community design, like design charrettes and walking tours and kind of walking away with this like youth vision of Scottsville, downtown Scottsville and Allen County as a whole. So it's really cool and interesting how different all these communities are and the stuff we're getting to do in them.
That's great to hear. I think one of the things that RPOP likes to do as well is kind of learn from other communities and see how we can bring it back to our community since we're all so different. So I appreciate all your answers. And Sarah, I have a question for you. Based on what we just heard, how are you hoping that the work that we just heard can show up in the Russell community?
Thanks for that question. I love that. I'm hoping it'll show up in a few different ways. A lot of what we're going to receive through this process is environmental information on properties. And what I hope that we can do with that information is provide the community with tools and language to advocate for what it is that they want. Because we've talked a lot about in the previous meeting that we had, these are going to be complicated, long processes, and the environmental information can be a lot to take in. But what I hope that we can do with our partnership with RPOP is give folks good information and specific language around environmental assessments, the condition of the property, and things that you can use in future conversations with as the investments continue to happen to advocate for what it is that you would like to see. I also think it's an exciting opportunity with the corridor planning because you're incorporating other partners in, but RPOP is sort of the hub convening a lot of these conversations and saying, hey, We know we have brownfield properties. We know there are some redevelopment barriers here, but here's what the community would like to see. Let's remove some of the barriers through the assessment work and then continue to connect to some other tools that are available to see these go from brownfields to gems in the community that are actively being used.
I would definitely agree. I know we're going to be talking about some of those brownfields that have been turned into gyms a little bit later in this presentation. But I want to thank both of you, Tyler and Sarah, for helping frame this conversation and providing some additional context for this work that we're all doing. But now I want to shift the conversation kind of back to the residents in the community. So with the next slide, we want to make sure that we are hearing from the community. So everybody that's out there that's listening, now we want to hear from you. So as you look at this map, think about what you remember along the 30th Street corridor. Maybe you remember businesses or warehouses, factories, storage yards, vacant buildings, or maybe even places where you worked. One of the things that we want you to think about is, what memories do you have of industrial uses or buildings in the 30th Street corridor? You can either drop them in the chat, or you can come off mute and share. Or if you're watching this video at a later point in time, just drop them in the comment section. We would love to hear from you. You might remember buildings that sat vacant for years, some industrial activity, trucking traffic, or just places that your family members have worked. Smells maybe of what's been going on in the neighborhood. All these things are very important for us to know, because your memory is part of the story of this corridor. Some history shows up on maps and public records, but some history also lives with the people who have experienced these changes firsthand. And we would love to hear from you on what those experiences are.
I'll share a memory that I have of the 30th Street corridor. And if we get comments on Facebook, we can definitely share those as well. But one of the things I remember about this area is that 15, 20 years ago, if you drove down Muhammad Ali and you passed what is now the Sports and Learning Center and the gravel lot that is the 30th and Madison Street site, there were actually lots of buildings. There were big warehouses, there were loading docks, there were all kinds of things that were brick, that were there, that were right up against the street on 30th, that were right up against the street on Muhammad Ali. And those were actually remnants of the tobacco industry. And we have some slides coming up where we're going to talk about that history of this area. But that is definitely one of the things that I remember from not terribly long ago in this area.
And I'm just going to thank you guys in advance for sharing and dropping those comments, because I know when we come back and look at this video in the future, there are going to be plenty of stories that help provide context beyond what the maps and the reports alone can show. And now I'm going to pass it to Teresa.
Thanks, Colby. So I have some tiny versions of some maps that we're going to have probably in bigger format when we do some in-person meetings about this topic later in the summer. So think of this as a preview. So I am not sure if you all are familiar with a resource that exists in the world called the Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps. There are lots of really cool databases and resources available at the Louisville Free Public Library. And this is one of those resources that you can access if you've got your library card and you go online. You can go into the research databases that the library maintains, and there is a set of maps. The first set of maps that they've got dates back to 1892, and then it goes all the way up into the 1950s. And these Sanborn maps were created by a private insurance company for the purposes of understanding risk and really looking at, the ability to sell insurance to industrial users, to commercial businesses, and looking at a level of detail that sometimes shows you even tanks that are inside of buildings and what happened in those tanks. Was it a tank full of water? Was it a tank full of cleaning fluid? Was it a tank full of acid? You can see an amazing history represented in these line drawings, these maps. And so what I've pulled together for the next part of our presentation tonight is a set of these images. These are all from the 1940s, and they reflect some of the history of this corridor. And you can see from these maps that the shapes of these buildings are very big. They're very industrial. This curved line, in this case, runs through a building or through a set of buildings, and it's a railroad track. And what this represents is actually the northern part of the Sports and Learning Center. So the track actually sits on this big area of vacant land with these smaller rectangles, which are actually houses. And the Centerwell facility that Humana built at the corner is sort of right up by the smallest house on the right-hand side of the map. The rest of these buildings are part of the National Tobacco Company's warehousing and storage and distribution facility. They also did a little bit of what they call stemming. So they pull the stems and the leaves apart from each other in this facility, and they dry the leaves before they shipped them out to be made into cigarettes or cigars or other forms of tobacco products. And so this is a really interesting thing to be able to dig into, these maps, because they give you so much history and so much understanding of how the city has developed over time. So we can go on to the next slide. So this is the southern part of the Sports and Learning Center. So Walnut Street has not yet been renamed Muhammad Ali Boulevard, but that is the street to the south on this slide. And then 30th Street is right here by this 308, this rectangle. And you can see a little bit more detail on this map than you could on the last one. You can see tobacco warehouse. You can see picking. You can see stemming. You can see a lot more detail about the kinds of activities that were going on in this space. And you can also see the P. Lorillard Company kind of printed on the diagonal to the right, or I'm sorry, to the left of the slide. P. Lorillard was a predecessor to National Tobacco. And so at the time this map was made, National Tobacco had not yet acquired Lorillard. Lorillard was operating on its own. So again, this is a level of really interesting detail about what was happening in this space in the 1940s. And so the next slide that we're going to go to is today's conditions. So actually, it's a little bit of history. So this photo up here on the left shows a set of really low brick buildings, and that is a reflection of the Sanborn map that we just looked at. Those are the buildings on the south side of the site. So that's the stemming and the picking and some of the other manufacturing focused spaces on that site. And that's what I remember being there. And then the picture to the bottom right shows what we all know to be the Norton Healthcare Sports and Learning Center. And so the redevelopment of this site on this brownfield, where this older industrial set of uses around the tobacco industry, and also the presence of that railroad track impacted soil quality and groundwater quality, has resulted in an amazing addition to the 30th Street corridor. And I'm not going to get too deeply into the weeds on the kinds of contaminants that were in the soil here or in the groundwater here. But I will say that this site took advantage of the Brownfields assessment grant program that the city offered. And so Sarah, the program that you manage, contributed pretty significantly to the overall development outcome at this site. And there was funding provided to support that work. So we can go on to the next slide. So this is going to be another one of those Sanborn maps. So this is actually the 30th and Madison Street site. And what I love most about this particular image is that it shows that there was a set of houses built along Walnut Street, Muhammad Ali Boulevard. And some of them are single family, some of them. You can see this bigger lot with the 4 sort of rectangles together clustered in the middle were multifamily or attached single family units. And this also paints the picture of the early years of the American Tobacco Company's investment in cigar manufacturing at this location. There actually were a lot of different tobacco products made in this space. I believe this one is at a time when they were making plugs as opposed to cigars. And so again, you get this level of detail here. It's a little bit tricky to see because it's tiny print, but so if you see the black buildings down on the bottom rectangle, there's a big one, and then there's 4 smaller ones sort of up toward the middle of the slide. And that actually represents the boiler room. And there's a level of detail here where it actually calls out a water tank that's in this area of the site. So you can really start to get a picture of like what this would have looked like when it was operating. The Sanborn Insurance Company also put notes about, we can go back for just another second. The Sanborn Insurance Company also put notes on these maps about how properties were managed. And so on this slide, you can see, well, you can't see because it's teeny tiny, but in the future, you'll be able to see some notes that talk about a watchman being there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the type of power that operated this facility and the kind of lighting that was available. And was it electric? Was it gas? How was it powered? And so again, really speaking to the history of the area. The other thing I'll call out is that in the upper left-hand corner of this block is a culvert manufacturer. So culverts are those pipes that go underneath roadways that help water flow back and forth so that it doesn't just stand on the road. And so up in the upper left-hand corner of this particular block, there was a metal culvert manufacturer. And so that's actually a really cool thing that we know about the history of this site. And then again, these diagonal or these curved lines are the railroad. And you can see that at one point there was a piece of the railroad that came all the way into the American Tobacco Company property. And that would have been used for the shipping and receiving of materials and finished products. So we can go on to the next slide. And we have that same sort of historic photo of what used to be. So this photo up on the left shows those houses along Walnut Street, Muhammad Ali Boulevard, and it actually shows the American Tobacco Company's manufacturing space. And then what I also like about this picture is that across the street, you can see more of those red brick buildings that we saw a couple slides ago with P. Lorillard's investments there on the north side of Muhammad Ali. So the other picture I think you guys have seen before. This is the concept vision for 30th and Madison Street that Russell, A Place of Promise, is working hard to develop. This site is a brownfield. We are going to talk probably pretty extensively over the next couple of meetings about what that means for the site and what we hope to do to clean it up and to manage it appropriately so that it's safe for human health and the environment. But the vision for this is a very green, very sustainable, very community-centered investment that has been driven by community input since its inception. So we can keep going. I got a couple more of these maps. I got a couple more sets of pictures to show you all. So this is a really interesting block. So this represents an area along Broadway between 30th and 28th Street. Elliott Avenue is in the back. And what we see here is that this is actually across the street from Goodwill's Opportunity Corner or campus, and we're going to see some pictures of that in just a minute. So what's cool here is that there actually was barrel making. There's a cooperage here. So if y'all are familiar, Brown-Forman used to make its own barrels in Louisville, Kentucky for aging bourbon. And this whole area of the community was full of bourbon distilleries, full of all kinds of really interesting industrial uses. There was vinegar production at one point around the corner from here. There was a lumber yard across the street. And so we just see this sort of concentration of industries around the distilled spirits industry and around wood, sort of concentrated in this Louisville cooperage facility that was here. And again, it's really hard to see this level of detail because of the scale of this image on your screen, but you can see the kilns where the wood would have been dried. you can see where they were making the slats that become the sides of the barrel. You can see the shop where they were making the tops and the bottoms of the barrel. And again, you can see those curvy lines coming along Elliott Avenue and down into the site would have reflected the railroad. So again, just a great snapshot of historic Russell. And then we can go on to the next slide. And this building up on the left is actually the cooperage. So it's cool to see that space. It's also cool to see what it looks like today. Obviously, we all know the Broadway corridor, and on that site where the cooperage existed, there's now the Taco Bell, the Plasma Place, and then Tark's maintenance garage, and where Metro Bank used to be in this bottom picture with the blue awning. So a lot of history in this area. So we can keep going. I think I might have one more of those to show you. I'm pretty sure I do. Yes. Okay, so this is the block of Broadway between 28th Street and the railroad. And so this is where the NIA Center is. This is where Goodwill's Opportunity Campus is. This is where Norton has built the West Louisville Hospital. There's some cool stuff happening in this space today. But we are also looking at a whole collection of uses. Up in the upper left corner, there was actually 2 businesses that made and stored and then sold and distributed ice. Merchants Ice, and then I forget the other name. But there's 2 ice manufacturers up in the upper left. There's also a junkyard sort of down in the bottom section of this area. There was concrete construction, like a construction company that was making like precast concrete things, and a whole bunch of storage sheds. There was a vinegar manufacturer, a furniture maker, and then more tobacco warehouses on this site. If you go back even further in history on this site, there were some other things happening in what looks like open space along the middle of this picture. And in that space, there was actually a stockyard. So there were animals being kept here, probably because the railroad was right there and it was easy access. But that's another really interesting piece of Louisville history. And then if we go on to the next slide, we can see what's there today. And that, of course, everyone recognizes the Opportunity Campus. Everybody recognizes the hospital that was built. And so those are really interesting additions. Both of those sites also were brownfields. I believe the state was involved in the assessment for those properties. And we'll talk more about the remediation in future meetings. A few other things I want to call out from older Sanborn records that y'all might either know the history of or have heard somebody talking about, or that might be new information to you. So in this area, this 30th Street corridor, so we talked about vinegar. There was also furniture production. There were several lumber yards. There was a parlor organ manufacturer, so a company that was making organs for people to have in their homes. There was an ironworks. So a place where iron pieces would have been made, maybe to be hand railings, maybe to be other decorative pieces, or industrial pieces. And then at 28th and Elliott, there was Louisville Baseball Park. So there was a full-on baseball stadium in this neighborhood. And so I just wanted to lift up those historical uses that were in this area just to reflect the diversity of the kinds of things that existed in the 30th Street corridor. So we can keep going. At this point, we have talked about a lot of stuff, and we might have some questions from the audience, but we also have a set of questions that we have to ask of the folks who are here with us today. So Tyler and Sarah, we probably have more questions for you all. Because it looks like we're not getting any comments from the Facebook, which is totally fine. So Eliza, I'm going to kick it over to you to manage the next section of this conversation.
Yes, indeed. All right, so the first question that we have for you all is, how does the 30th Street corridor compare to the other 2 communities that will be doing this work to plan for Brownfields redevelopment?
That's a tough question. I think it's incredibly different, but also similar in some ways. I think it's different that the history is different. The demographics are different. The sort of positioning as an urban space and urban center are much different. But sort of this kind of post-industrial landscape that is also informed to some degree by tobacco makes it pretty similar to Maysville. Maysville was once the world's second largest exporter of burley tobacco. So there are a lot of those. I only know that because it's my hometown. So, but it used to be like a port. There are a few old tobacco warehouses still standing. Some have been torn down and they're lots. So I think in some of the types of buildings and the types of space and how the buildings are oriented spatially, I think it's similar to Maysville at least. But in a lot of ways, it's very different. And I also think that the sort of the historic and even the present, to some degree, density of that corridor create like really unique opportunities for really exciting infill and like really cool, robust neighborhoods that, that serve the people that live there. So similar but different.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is really interesting about the difference in demographics and how those locations were shaped in the past. And I'm interested to see how each community redevelops in the future. And then the second question I have is, will there be any opportunities to check in with the other communities over the next 18 months as our work continues?
I certainly want to connect y'all with our leaders in the other communities. And so we can learn from each other in that way. And we haven't really done any kind of like public virtual forums in those communities yet, but it's definitely an opportunity or an idea worth exploring. And I know that Kirsten and the Energy and Environment Cabinet are working on some web components that might build out more updates about what's going on in the communities. But yeah, we'll have to think about ways to keep folks in other places also informed about what's in the mix.
Okay, and I have another question. 1 second. For Sarah, and that is, how does the history of a property help people understand what might be happening with water or soil quality?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I'll build on what Teresa had talked about before when she showed us the Sanborn maps and you saw examples of tobacco use and other things. So before we had the EPA and before we had the set of environmental regulations that exist today, it was a little bit of the Wild West. And sometimes these past uses and the way that they disposed of what was happening on the property may have gotten into the soil and it may have gotten into the groundwater. So brownfields are a little bit like looking into the past to look to the future. So you can get a good understanding of, and I'm not going to try to use terms about chemicals because that is way beyond my understanding and we work with the proper scientists for that. But what I can tell you from what I do know is there are things that were not regulated in the same way in the past that are regulated more today, but understanding what was used in the past, you can get a sense of what may have from one way or another went from the property or the use into the soil or into the groundwater. So this is a great question.
Yeah, and this is a personal question that I just thought of as you were answering that question. With these brownfields usually having contamination of some sort or other conditions that can complicate redevelopment, are there any specific restrictions that are usually met when you are going through the redevelopment phase and determining what can be built on these lands?
That's such a good question. Thank you for asking. Yes, there are restrictions. So, Louisville Metro, we do not have any regulatory authority. The state, the Energy and Environment Cabinet that Tyler mentioned, that's our regulatory body. And the reason I mention that to you is as we go through assessment and we understand what chemicals, what environmental issues may exist on a property, typically the next step is forming a plan for cleanup and management. And the management of these properties can look like a couple different things. There's sort of two tools in the state's toolkit. One of them is called institutional controls, and what that could be are things like restricting groundwater usage on the site. You can restrict different types of uses. In some situations, there will be what's called an environmental covenant on the property, and that's something, it's a legal document that runs with the land that could say, in a particular case, residential is not allowed on this property, things of that nature. Then you also have engineering controls, and that can look like various things as well. It all depends on the property, the end use, what's going on. But some examples could be things like groundwater monitoring. So Metro is the owner of some brownfields, and we have a few properties that have wells on them. They are, you might notice them. I had never noticed these, but like for example, Slugger Field had some, and you can see the cap of it is just this small metal circle that says groundwater monitoring well. And it has a long tube that goes all the way down, tapping into the groundwater. And we are responsible for sampling that at a frequency that is specified by the state and regulated by the state. And we send the results of that over to the state to make sure that the contamination is not getting worse and that it's not migrating off site. And there's a few other examples of engineering controls. One other that I'll throw out is properties that may have a past use that could have resulted in vapor issues, so air contamination. Sometimes there's a vapor system installed, so that's sort of a physical device, and there are a few different kinds, but what it can do is sort of pull and clean the air through the building, and it's actively running. So thank you for asking.
Thank you for that answer. That was really interesting. And I have one last question, and of course, if anyone else has any more, feel free. But how can we learn more about historic industrial land uses?
I may have Tyler help me with this one, but I'm happy to start. There are a few different ways. So what I can offer you today, Teresa showed you the Sanborn maps. What I can offer is, if you are always welcome to email or call me, we have a lot of files of phase 1 environmental site assessments that include the Sanborn map as well as other documented history of the property. I'm happy to share those with you. You just need to send me an address and I can tell you whether or not I have it. I have them on properties that Metro has done assessment work on in the past, so I don't have them on everything, but I have a decent collection. The state has probably a much larger collection of information on properties, so they're also a great resource. Similar, you can email them and ask, do you have any information on this property, and we can share that. So that's sort of what comes to mind immediately. I don't know if Tyler had other thoughts about that.
That is a great question that I wish I had a better answer to. I think, in addition to what Sarah suggested, also, like, if you want to get really in the weeds of it, you could look into PVA, like look into records from the PVA, to understand past ownership, past site reuse, past site use, past zoning, things like that. I'm not sure to what degree, like, any kind of museums or sort of local historians might have information in Louisville as well. And I think I would imagine there is something somewhere there, with given the robust sort of cultural history of Russell. Um, and I would imagine the elders of the neighborhood are great in that. And there's probably some really cool oral histories somewhere. We also, like, this is also a cheap plug. Today we actually I do a monthly webinar series as part of this work. And today we actually had Sarah's boss, Jeff O'Brien, on talking about public-private partnerships. And in that webinar, he shared multiple sites around Louisville that have used Brownfields funding kind of over the last 20, 30 years. So that could be a cool resource. If y'all want to watch our Blueprint Kentucky webinar, just Google that. It should be online in the next 3 or 4 days. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for that.
Those were great answers. Great starting
I can
point.
add some for
Yeah.
Jefferson County.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who are watching the Facebook chat, there are a really great set of aerial photographs available through Logic, LOJIC, which is a GIS inventory of Jefferson County. And you can learn about planning and zoning related issues. You can see where the sewers and the water lines run. There's all kinds of great information there. There's an amazing story map about redlining that's available on Logic. And you can also find out like things like what's my zip code, or what's the snow plowing schedule for the city look like on Logic. So tons of great resources. Check it out. But those aerial photographs will date back into the 90s, and so you can see pictures of from above of what the city used to look like. A couple of other things I want to just put in plugs for. So the University of Louisville has an amazing photograph archive, the digital archives, and most of the historic photos that I showed you are actually from the archives at U of L. You can get in there and poke around. You can search by term, you can search industrial, you can search house, you can search people. There's an amazing inventory of photographs. The Courier Journal also has some of that on their website, but they make you pay for it. And then the last thing I'll plug is that the Filson maintains its own set of archives of digital photos, but they're actually not digital photos, they're physical photos. And so to access those, you have to actually go to the Filson and ask to look at the archives. But there are some great things that you can uncover about the history of Louisville, the history of Russell, and the history of the 30th Street corridor, both online and in person. So I just wanted to toss out a few more resources.
Well, thank you all for answering those questions. And Tyler, do not be shy about your plugs, shameless plugs all around. And actually, Kobe will be telling us more about where we can stay connected with what our pop's got going on. So I'll pass it off to you.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you all for being a part of this conversation tonight. It was a great conversation, but the work does not end with this just one meeting. We will continue these conversations during future summer meetings as well. And you can also stay involved by following RPOP on social media, visiting the RPOP website, and also checking out Louisville Metro's Brownfields website for updates. And also check out Blueprint Kentucky. We got webinars that we can also learn for, which is a great resource. And most importantly, we want you to continue to share your knowledge and your experiences. The future of this 30th Street corridor should include the voices of the people who know the community the best. So we want to make sure that we continue to hear from you. So if you're watching this video at a later time, drop your comments under the video, because you never know who will come back and who needs that knowledge and wants to hear about your experiences. And I just want to close out by saying thank you again for your time tonight. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys at the next meeting.